Hey nerds, return with us to Middle-earth as we review and break down the Lord of the Rings Rings of Power episode 205 entitled Halls of Stone, starting now. Welcome back to the Nerd Social. I'm Nathan.
And
as
I
always,
am
if
Paula.
you want to jump ahead of the intro to our analysis or ratings, they are chapter links below. A lot's happened this week, so let's get into the specifics. The spoiler-free log line provided by Amazon is, in this episode, when Durin grows suspicious of the Dwarven rings, Celebrimbor must reassess his priorities. Amidst Númenor's shifting currents, Elendil searches for hope. Paula, what did you think of this episode? Your spoiler-free thoughts this week?
Frustrating for me with certain characters, but I thought it was good. It tells you a little bit more of the story and slow as well.
Okay, so you thought it's slow? Yeah, I actually have a more favorable view of this episode than last episode. Like, I was dancing around it when we did the spoiler-free review last week, but like I said when we got into the breakdown, the Tom Bombadil stuff was just so boring to me last week. I thought the visual effects in this episode was great. The stuff in Khazad-dûm, I always love when we're with the dwarves, so maybe that's why I like this episode more. The stuff going on with Durin and his father was great. The stuff with Celebrimbor was good as well, because as the spoiler-free logline alludes to, I was wondering if he was going to be a chump the entire season and just be led around by Anatar with him not considering anything, and Durin coming to him, as the spoiler-free logline mentions, helped him try to reassess some things, which is good. It gives his character more nuance, and also it makes Sauron less of an obvious villain. He has to work a little bit more at manipulation, have to be a little bit more subtle, which I appreciated. The stuff in Númenor, I can't really get into the specifics, but I'm starting to hate some of the characters there. Not in a good way. It's not like they're boring, just like they are just the worst people. So the political stuff in Númenor was interesting this week for a couple reasons, and we can get into when we do the spoiler breakdown. So yeah, so overall, I think the episode sets up future conflicts while maintaining some of the intrigue. So yeah, I think it was a pretty good episode. I liked it better than last week's. So how would you rate the episode?
I'll give it an 8.
Okay, so I think I'm gonna give it a road trip as well, an 8 on our scale. And if you're unfamiliar with our scale, it's down in the description. Despite some pacing issues, which I think you alluded to, I enjoyed the episode more than last week, mostly because the nuance with Celebrimbor and the intrigue in Númenor. All right, so let's get into recapping and breaking this down, talking about the specifics. If you haven't seen the episode, go see the episode. And also, if you're enjoying our review, please like and share. We really appreciate it. All right, spoilers ahead. So we start the episode in Khazad-dûm. Durin is donning the new ring that he has, the Ring of Power, which comes to be known as the Ring of Thor, which is one of the 7 rings given to the dwarves. So he finds new places to dig. If you remember from the previous 2 episodes back, the eruption at Mount Doom collapsed all of their light shafts. So he's creating shafts and claiming greater power for Moria. His son and the Delve Master, I think his name's Nevin, we'll have to check that, object to some of his suggestions at first because they think he's gonna dig through some foundation walls, but he insists and he uncovers some shafts, and also he thinks that there's a lot more wealth to uncover. So the rings of power that the dwarves are given aren't as corruptible in the same way as the ones that were given to men. They just make the dwarves more like themselves, more greedy, which we also see later on in this episode. As I mentioned earlier, some of the visuals in Moria are really great. The set design and also the special effects that they use to render the underground city is really cool. What did you think of the beginning of this episode, and I guess the relationship between the 2 Durins? They seem to be always going in opposite directions. Last season, we're fighting because Durin the Elder didn't want to deal with the elves. And now Durin the Younger is on his father's side, and now they're flipped. They're always going in the opposite direction.
Yeah, it is obvious that Durin has more open mind and more prone to sway from tradition and the norm, and that's the basis of the clash. But then here specifically with Durin Sr. wanting to keep digging deeper, Durin Jr. actually has a valid concern there, which comes from his wife.
Yeah.
Remember, she went down there and then it was...
Yeah, she also, she cautions him later on in the episode, even though the king is riding high. But anyway, from here, we jump over to Eregion, and Celebrimbor is celebrating with some dwarves. The doors of Durin are unveiled, and if you've seen the movies, they show up in the movies when they get to Khazad-dûm. I think this is the Western Gate, if I remember correctly. If not, I will correct it in the edit. However, tensions rise between him and Annatar. Even before Doran showed up, I think I alluded to the Doran's visit as the catalyst to Celebrimbor being suspicious of Annatar, but actually even before Doran showed up, he was bristling at the thought of creating the rings for men because he thinks that they're potential for corruption, because he thinks men are weak. And Annatar does his pretty words thing, and he mentions men of old who actually rose to the occasion, like Elrond's brother. So Elrond's brother decided to become a man as opposed to a half-elven like he did. So he started Númenor. But yeah, he's not, Celebrimbor isn't swayed by this. Annatar in frustration says that he'll just do it himself. It's cool to see that he's not as easily deceived as I thought he was going to be, or it seemed that he was earlier on in the season. So what did you think of their dynamic here?
I was glad to see that Celebrimbor has a little bit of a backbone, and that his principle and his duty did not entirely surpass his ego, right? There was a limit.
It looks like he has some common sense. We know how this is going to end up because if you've seen the movies, all the rings do get created, but it's good to see a little bit more nuance in his character and him pushing against him and also seeing through some of his stuff. I think he specifically says,
"It is a game you play, is it not? Sowing seeds in others' minds and then convincing them that the fruit is of their own thought."
So yeah, he knows he's playing him a little bit.
But then also I thought, oh my gosh, are we humans really that bad? Because he was able to be persuaded for every other race. But then when it came to humans, that's why he threw that tells us
I think in
about
Tolkien's he always portrays humans as the most corruptible of all the species on the planet. So yeah. So then we jump over to Númenor and its political intrigue there. Pharazôn reveals his bitterness towards the elves, which we've seen in the previous episodes, and the limitations of men. They mention the mountain Mentara, where they can see the Valar from there, and he thinks that the elves put it there so they could see that men will always die and elves will always continue. His son tries to buck him by saying, you have the scepter now. With the scepter, we can create a new age of men. And Pharazôn hints at a prophecy regarding Kemen's future, creating a little bit of tension between the two of them, because he's like, I'll tell you if you serve me well, otherwise I'm going to have to find another use for you. So yeah, I think Pharazôn's a massive tool, but his son might be worse. So what did you think of their relationship?
Kemen is obviously trying everything he can to please his dad. He may not be necessarily evil at the core, it's more driven by his father. And Pharazôn is worse that of...
He's pretty... I really don't... Honestly, I go back and forth from seeing who's the worst. Pharazôn is obviously a very ambitious and obviously insatiable man, because he's like, my entire life I thought the scepter is what I want, and now he has the scepter and he's, oh, now I want immortality or whatever. And maybe that's how Sauron tempts him later on. That's why the Númenor, spoilers for the books, Númenor falls later on. Then we go over to a scene between Meriel and Arondir, and they argue about the future of Númenor, and Meriel questions her decisions, but also commands him to basically continue this path, because what he saw was riding away from the city. Armelanos is where they are. They're in the capital city, Armelanos. And what she saw was the destruction of Armelanos, and she assumes that because he didn't see the destruction, that it's fine. But that really doesn't make any sense whatsoever, because it's obvious to me, even without seeing extra episodes, they're getting prophecies from their future, not necessarily prophecies of the future, but whatever. So what did you think of her leadership here, her arc so far?
Listen, I'm a little disappointed. I really wanted to see her rise to the top and all. I am hopeful that at least she won't be killed off or anything of that sort.
And then this is the other person who I hate. The next scene is Elendil's daughter, Rian, smugly stripping his crew of their rank. She says that she's doing it because of her sorrow, because of her brother, and her father questions her about that. The queen's downfall really gave you a great promotion here. And we also see Pharazôn looking into a Palantir at the end of the scene. But before that, there's also some conflict between Kemen and Elendil that I guess comes to a head later on in the episode. They strip everyone of their rank, but everyone of the crew still respects him as the captain, which doesn't sit well with Kemen because he's a very weak man in the shadow of his father. But But honestly, I dislike his daughter most in this scene. Like, I want to smack her. She seems so smug. So, what did you think of their interactions there?
Worst Scholar of the Year. I actually, for a moment, I forgot that it was his daughter. And then at that scene is when I remembered. And I just thought, what is wrong with her? She's grieving her brother, but her father is still...
He's losing a son. He doesn't feel something. He's not hurt that he lost his son. She could be with her father grieving together instead of trying to destroy his life. From her perspective, he's the only one that she has left. And she, in the name of grieving her brother, she's going to tear down the life of her father. Makes no sense. Makes no sense.
Yes, it makes no sense whatsoever. Even if her brother was still alive, she still would have acted.
Yeah, I know. It showed that she wasn't one of the faithful in the last season, but still, it's crazy. Anyway, then we jump over to Lindon, and the High King receives the misleading letter that Celebrimbor sent under the influence of Anatar, which of course is causing a bit of confusion there. He believes that everything in Eregion is fine despite the ongoing developments with Anatar. After he got the message from Celebrimbor, he started to get visions, and his general was like, we have to go to Mordor, and he was hesitant because of the visions he was getting. She basically said, are you taking counsel from the ring? She seems just as skeptical as Elrond was in the previous episode about the ring. Meanwhile, we get a cut of Elrond racing towards Lindon to warn the king that Adar's army of orcs is marching towards Eregion. And then we jump back to Khazad-dûm. Disa and Durin have a conversation about King Durin III's growing reliance on the ring. Disa's very concerned that the power is going to corrupt him. She thinks that even the most virtuous of dwarfs would be corrupted by that sort of power because it really, as she mentions, to be a stone singer requires like a lifetime of dedication and development. You can't just put on something and have that power, so it's probably corruptible. Later, the third begins to suspect those around him, including his lieutenant there, the Delve Master. We see something similar to that in movies when with the One Ring, people get very envious of the ring, starts to really mess with their mind. Durin begins planning to dig deeper, despite the warnings that there's an ancient evil lurking beneath them. This is something that you mentioned earlier. This is when was in the market and they found out that his father is basically creating like 100% tax. Like every coin that's sold, they have to give a tax to ring tribute. When she was in the market, the stone got away from her and then she sung and heard something evil lurking. So Durin the Fourth mentions this to his father and he basically just dismisses it out of greed. Basically, he's like, we've only really gotten a thimble of the riches out of this mountain. Yeah, how do you think this is being portrayed? I guess a slow corruption of Durin.
Yeah, no, I think it's being well done because we've known Durin the Third to be kind, and then all of a sudden his whole personality shift, reminiscing of the movie Lord of the Rings. So right away you know that there's something wrong with the ring that he is wearing and that it's corrupting him. Yeah, so
well done. I think it's a good portrayal by the actor as well, playing the king. Then we jump over next door to Khazad-dûm, and some chaos is erupting inside of Celebrimbor's workshop when an elf, I think her name is Aladora, experiences a vision of a being with skin like fire. So she disappears for a bit, and if you watch the movies, this is something that happens when you put the One Ring on, and she sees the same place, but it's shrouded in smoke. Again, this is something similar to the movies, but she also sees someone with their skin on fire. We've seen other things with their skin on fire. We've seen Balrogs, those giant things that are in Moria with the giant sword that fought Gandalf in the movie. But Sauron is also described as having his skin on fire, especially after the Second Age when he loses his form when Númenor falls. I suspect what she saw with Sauron. Also in this part of the episode, Anatar continues to try to manipulate things here. He tries to shut down this conversation so she can't continue to describe what she saw, and tensions rise between Celebrimbor and Anatar here as well. When Durin III comes from Moria to express his concern about the ring and his father, he mentions that his father has never been a greedy man, so the fact that he's acting greedy now is completely out of his regular character. So yeah. So what do you think she saw?
I think she saw Sauron's true form. If you remember in Lord of the Ring, every time Frodo put on the ring, there is these other creatures coming after him. Yeah. So I really think that it was just the exact same setting.
Yeah, that makes sense. We also see Anatar looking down, or Anatar/Sauron looking down this conversation that Celebrimbor is having with Durin, and he's starting to think that he's losing his grip on Celebrimbor. So he's starting to put seeds of doubt in the smiths in his workshop. Like, he starts talking to her about maybe what she saw wasn't him because he's trying to take her off the scent. Maybe what she saw was actually Celebrimbor because of all the stress. So he's definitely trying to work her and work other people as well. Then we jump back to Númenor, and there's a ceremony honoring the fallen soldiers from the war in Middle-earth and the Southlands, including Isildur. Valandil is there with Elendil, and it's interrupted by Kemen and a bunch of soldiers who are going to destroy the shrine to put an aqueduct through it. Tensions escalate between Kemen and Elendil, resulting in a confrontation between Kemen and Elendil, and then Kemen stabs him in the back because his pride was broken or whatever, because he nearly drowned Valandil in the fight, and then Valandil gets the better of him and breaks his shoulder, and yeah, he was about to kill him, and then Valandil tells him not to kill him, and then he gets stabbed in the back. So yeah, this is why I was saying, I don't know, it really depends on the scene, who I hate more between Pharazôn and Kemen. Kemen is a really sniveling coward, in addition to being a bad person. I don't know that Pharazôn would have stabbed someone in the back. I think he probably wouldn't have been, he's a much larger man as well, he probably wouldn't have been invested as quickly, so he wouldn't have felt like he needed to do that. So who knows? Yeah. Anyway, we jump back to Eregion, and Celebrimbor argues with Annatar about the dwarven rings. He basically asks him point blank if he manipulated the forging process, and of course he says no. He lies, and again manipulates him. He's like, I didn't do it. We did, basically together. We lied to the king about the closing the forge. Our intentions probably poison the ring. So he's again trying to play with him here, because he's like, what you should do is go and confess to the king. So Celebrimbor is concerned that if he does that, the king will never let him forge anything again. So again, more manipulation here. So we got to forge ahead, or we can go and tell the king.
That's also when Celebrimbor got involved in the process of creating the rings for the humans, because prior to...
Well, you're right. Celebrimbor gets involved because he thinks that he has to redeem the project. And then we get a final scene in Khazad-dûm, where Durin IV reports to his father about the potential corruption of the ring, but he's dismissed, and actually Durin III restores his son's rank and his inheritance, basically just ignoring his warnings. So it's funny because he wanted to make up with his father, and he has, but now he's concerned about his father. Disa makes him swear that he'll never wear one of the rings of power in this scene as well. Then we get a final scene in Eregion. Celebrimbor gives a speech to his smiths, basically blaming them, even though it's his own failure, saying that maybe they were slovenly or hubris crept into their work. Again, this is more him setting him up to look like a crazy person, because he gives this crazy speech blaming them, even though they're like, we did everything to your exacting standards. And then Annatar is the one who gets to play the nice guy and say, oh, he might be a little bit off, he's just trying to make something. So he put himself between them and Celebrimbor. And then we see the orc army are basically approaching Eregion the next morning as well. Back in Lindon, Elrond actually reaches the High King and tries to convince him that the orc army is not in Mordor, but marching towards Eregion, and the king is hesitant to act, fearing that Sauron is probably the architect of all this, and he's concerned that he can't fight Adar and Sauron, both. And then we get a scene outside of Eregion, probably around the same river that we were at in the last episode when Galadriel was captured. Galadriel learns that she's not a prisoner. Instead, Adar sees her as a potential ally in their common struggle against Sauron, and then the episode ends with a vision of Annatar in the Forge of Eregion. All right, so that's pretty much it for this episode. Did you have any other thoughts about the episode?
Do you think that, so we know that Annatar is essentially playing on Celebrimbor's ego. Do you think that Celebrimbor is afraid of Annatar? Because every once in a while I feel like there's this fear.
He's definitely more imposing than him, but I get a sense that there is a little bit of fear, but not necessarily. So he's technically the Lord of Eregion. He can make him leave it anytime he wants, but so he's playing a more subtle game. He stands over him sometimes, and I feel like sometimes there's some people that through their pure magnetism make you forget who you are, and I think that's what's happening here. He has a bunch of soldiers. He can make him leave whenever he wants to, but just his presence, his magnetism, sometimes when they're one-on-one with each other, he forgets who he is, I think. And he forgets that he has the power to make him leave whenever he wants to. But yeah, he's interesting. The relationship between them is probably the most interesting thing this season for me anyway.
Yeah, for me too.
So that is what we think, but we want to hear what you guys think. So please comment down below, like, and share if you enjoyed our conversation and review, and subscribe for more in-depth analysis of film and TV. All right, guys, see you in the next one. Bye.